So please welcome Caitlin Wells. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do my best this morning. My voice is shot from yesterday presenting and talking all day long. I don't have a day job where I talk a lot, so I'm going to do my best. Anyways, my name is Caitlin Wells. I'm with Happy Humblestead. There we go. So what are you going to learn today? You're going to learn how to raise quail. So why quail? A little bit about quail biology and health, how to take care of them, how to select the right type of quail for your flock, how you're going to handle them, housing and basic equipment that you need to raise them, how to feed them, how to breed them, how to hatch them. So basically we're going to go over hatch to harvest and then talk a little bit about processing and storage as well. I did a quail processing class here yesterday. I may do another demonstration today. If there's enough interest, just let me know. Come to my booth. We're Happy Humblestead. We're over in that other building. So, the history of quail keeping and why quails are an excellent addition to any farm, homestead, or self-sufficiency efforts. So a lot of people ask me, why quail? Why not chickens? Well, look at this egg and think, well, how many of those do I need to make a meal, right? A lot. The answer is a lot. But for me, quail are better than chickens, and we'll get into that in a little bit more. So quail, the domesticated quail that we raise for meat birds are actually considered Coturnix quail. They're not native to the U.S. like a bob white quail is. This is what they look like. So they originally kept as songbirds by the Chinese, and then the Japanese domesticated them in the 11th century. So people have been commercially farming this type of bird for over 1,000 years, which is kind of cool. There's a big history there. And when some people will say like, well, I'm looking for a celadon Coturnix, or I'm looking for a pansy fee or anything. What they're referring to is usually a color or a recessive trait that they're looking for. All Coturnix quail are Coturnix quail. They can all interbreed. They're not different breeds. They're just different colors. It's like having a chocolate lab or a silver lab. They're not different. They're just different colors, right? You can get a bunch of different colors of Labrador retrievers in the same litter depending on what your parents' genetics are. So these are kind of the same. Another thing to note is these Coturnix quail cannot breed with the native quail here in Virginia. So the bob white quail are completely different than these Coturnix quail. Quail in the United States, when I talk about quail, most people are familiar with bob whites because that's what's native, that's what we used to hunt. Bob whites have declined a lot in population. And as such, these guys have really, if you get quail like in a restaurant or anything like that, you're getting a Coturnix quail. These are what are farmed commercially. They're easy to farm commercially, and they're great for small homesteads because of their quick turnaround time. So if you want to raise quail, you need to have a plan, and you need to know, are you going to raise these for self-sufficiency efforts? Are you looking to raise them for a farmer's market? Are you just wanting to use, to have them for some eggs and maybe use their poop in your garden? They make a great garden fertilizer. Or are you planning on doing a larger scale and marketing to restaurants? You totally can do any of them. But whatever you do, you need to be honest with yourself, right? Like, do you have the time to put into them? Do you have the resources? Do you have the skills? Like, are you going to spend money or are you going to spend time is what I always tell people. There's a little bit of a trade-off there, okay? So for self-sufficiency efforts, quail are really easy because they're small and they're easy to feed. Hatch to harvest is 8 weeks. And it can be 6 weeks if you have standard quail and not the jumbo quail like I raise. So there's a couple difference in ounces on size. I always tell people before you get neck deep in any project, make sure you can process them. Otherwise, you just have some really pretty pets, right? I mean, they make really pretty pets, and they were kept traditionally as songbirds. Lots of people keep this breed of quail as pets in their homes, in their apartments. They build cute little enclosures for them, and they make great pets. I'm gonna go ahead and give you back, yeah. Thank you. But if you're gonna eat quail, if you're gonna raise it for meat, how often are you gonna eat it? Basically, one bird is for one person per meal. So how many do you need? What parts are you gonna use? You're gonna use all of it or not? My dog, processing day is his favorite day on the farm because he gets everything that we're not eating, including like the head, the feet, all of it. He eats it all. How are you going to deal with loss? Are you going to involve your kids? And how do you want to keep them? To my point earlier, quail are excellent for the garden. Their manure is basically a 3-2-2. So it cannot go on your garden cold. You do need to compost it. But if you don't want to spend the full time composting it, I put it like half composted underneath my corn, and I have beautiful corn because corn is a very high nitrogen feeder, so they go well together. For farmers markets and restaurants, quail are a great option if you want to make a little bit of money. My birds pay for themselves, and that was even before we started doing events like this. And the cool thing is quail fall under the Virginia Poultry Program, so you can get an exemption to process them. If you process less than 1,000 birds a year to sell, you don't need a license to do so in the state of Virginia, which is kind of neat. If you are going to do that route, you should consider getting insurance. And before you get into like restaurants and farmers markets, have your systems down, right? Because consistency matters. Quail lay between 280 and 300 eggs a year, but they take breaks for molting, they take breaks for changes in light. You're not going to get an egg a day 365 days a year, so you have to kind of think about that. And basically, how big do you want to go? Scale matters. So to keep your quail happy, you need to know how to keep them healthy. So when quail hatch as babies, they're about the size of a quarter. They're very wet and sticky when they come out of the incubator. We leave ours in the incubator for 48 hours because that gives them time to dry and fluff out and get moving. The yolk inside the egg, they absorb that yolk, so they have some nutrition. They do not need to come out within a certain amount of hours, like a couple of hours. They're good for 24 to 48 hours in their incubator. So your average bird is going to live about 3 years. Your hens will lay for 1 to 2. If you supplement your light over the winter, you're going to be closer on that 1 to 1.5 range. If you don't supplement the light and you give them the winter off, they'll lay for 2 years. And you can process between 6 and 10 weeks, depending on breed and growth rate. So standards are 6 weeks, jumbos are as early as 8. I like to let my jumbos go to 10. They get like an extra ounce, and for me, 2 extra weeks is not that big of a deal. They eat 2 tablespoons of food a day. So what do they eat? Pellets and hay, forage, and free-range items. So there's a heavy asterisk on free-range. You can't actually free-range quail because they're not trainable birds. They will not come back. They will run away and you will never see them again. They will probably be eaten very quickly. They are the potato chip of the world. Everything likes to eat quail, including us. We're no different. So our quails, they get a commercial pellet or crumble food. They get as much hay as they want to pick around in. We forage, they like kitchen scraps and vegetables. They're kind of a lot like a chicken. They love worms, insects, things like that. So we give them all that kind of stuff too. Diseases. How do you keep your quail safe from disease? The big ones are coccidosis, which you can get medicated feed when they're babies to kind of vaccinate them against that. But as long as you're not keeping your quail on the ground, cox is not really something you got to worry about. It's not that big of a deal. Avian flu. We all worry about avian flu if you have birds at all. Some years more than others. With quail, if you're keeping them in a cage-style system, if they have a roof on them, ideally they're not interacting with other birds. So like H1N5 or whichever avian flu we have, they're very contagious to quail. However, it's harder for them to get it because the wild birds aren't going up to their cage to interact with them. So there's kind of a little bit of built-in protection there. Coryza, mites and lice, worms, just like any other bird. They can get all of these things. They're all very treatable, except for the avian flu. You can't really treat that. So what quail should you buy and how do you handle them? You saw me holding that bird earlier. Preferably have your hands on their wings, but if not, hold them, by their legs on the bottom. I always tell people, when you're choosing your quail, you got to think about what's important to you. Do you want to raise quail just for eggs? If so, you don't really need a rooster. Quail will lay eggs without having a rooster present. If you want to have eggs, have fertilized eggs and hatch out babies, you need a rooster. So we like to say that you need at least 3 hens per rooster, preferably 4. And you need to pick what kind of quail you want. So once you get into the world of quail, there's all kinds of beautiful colors. The standard quail is the wild brown, well, it looks like that first picture I have. Looks like that one on the right. Those are wild, or brown, wild, or pharaoh babies. They all mean the same thing. That's a brown baby. There are white quail. There are speckled quail. There are quails that are red. There are quails that are called tuxedo. They look like they have like a colored back. It's black and like white, like they're wearing a little penguin suit. There are some people who are working on solid black quails. You can get quails in any color. The other cool thing about quail is they lay different colored eggs. So this is what a standard quail egg looks like. Just brown and speckled. They're really pretty. This is what a celadon quail egg looks like. Or blue. This is a recessive trait. You're going to pay a lot more to get those. So you got to decide, do you care if they look, if you have a variety of color of eggs or not. When I started, I didn't care. We started with all jumbo browns. Somehow I wound up with one that was laying celadon eggs, and all of a sudden I got addicted, and now I have all kinds of them. So, quail math is a lot like chicken math. You also have to think about if you want to buy chicks, juveniles, or adults. So chicks need heat. You can usually buy them from a breeder, a week or so or less old. You're gonna have to supplement heat for them. Juveniles is what I recommend people buy normally. The ones that are off heat at 3 weeks old or older. And whenever you move a quail, you're gonna stop laying. So if you buy an adult quail from someone, you don't have to deal with any of the other things. They're ready to go. They've already started laying. They're good, right? But once you move them to your house, they will stop laying anywhere from between 2 weeks and 2 months. Any type of stress causes them to stop laying. So that means moving. That means, your dog barking at them and stressing them out. Anything that can really stress them will cause them to stop laying. That said, they can get used to a lot of stuff. So I've got a dog. We've got a baby. We've got very loud peacocks that like to come around and make noise. So they can get used to a lot, but regardless, when you move them, they're going to stop laying. So what I always tell people, best bet is to get your quail about 4 or 5 weeks old. You're going to spend that 2-week waiting period. That's when their system is getting used to laying anyway. So when the trigger goes for oh hey, we need to start laying eggs, they're already going to be in their space, and it's not going to reset the clock. And usually juveniles are cheaper than adults as well. So when you bring your birds home, ask your breeder about food. We're going to talk a little about quail food and how to feed them. Already have your housing set up, because remember, once you move them again, you're going to reset the time clock. Anytime you move your birds, they're going to stop laying. It's just the way it works. It just stresses them out. Whenever you bring a new bird to your homestead, you want to quarantine them, make sure they don't have any problems. Our quarantine period is 30 days. They don't get integrated into my flock for at least 30 days. And usually if I'm bringing birds in, I bring in a whole breeder set, and they never interact with my other flock. It's just a biosecurity thing. Be prepared to handle them gently but firmly. So quail's bones are very fragile. You can break them just with your hands. It doesn't take a whole lot of pressure. Quail bones are actually fragile enough that once they're cooked, we can eat them. Humans could literally chew them up if they wanted. I don't, but they could be. So you just want to be careful when you're handling them, because you can have them break a wing or a leg pretty easily. To house them, obviously happy quails equals happy food, right? We want them to be happy and healthy, so they grow to their fullest potential and they have one bad day. That's my rule of thumb. I want my animals to have very happy, healthy lives and have one bad day. We all have one bad day, right, at the very end. So that's what we're aiming for. This is the most common way to keep them, and this is what we're moving to all of our cages with. So the cage is battery style system. You see it with rabbits, some as well. It means your breeding is controlled and your record keeping is easy. So they have battery style cages that's really like this one right here. My bad. Did I break it? No, okay. So with those style of cages, your breeding's controlled, your record keeping is easy. It's easy to look at your birds every day, make sure, hey, they're healthy, right? There's nothing going on. If somebody's acting sick, you can really respond quickly. We keep one cage as a hospital cage. Sometimes they pick on each other. Sometimes, accidents happen in the cage. So we like to keep one cage open to put our birds in to like rest and recover if they need it. Sometimes we have an overzealous roux who really overworks his ladies, and when that happens, we throw him in the hospital and give his girls a break, and we usually move him in another lady or two to kind of spread the load out a little bit and make it easier for everybody. In this style system, there is less fighting, just because usually you're keeping one breeding set only, so the roux aren't going to fight together when that happens. If you have enough females, your roux aren't going to fight anyways, but it's just a way that it's done that all the commercial breeders do that. It does take longer to do your daily routine. You can do this. There's a lot that you can do to automate these systems, or you can do automatic waterers and automatic feeders. But if you don't have those systems set up, obviously it takes more time to go to one cage individually than it does to dump a whole thing of feed in the middle of like an aviary in a big bucket, right? Like I said, it's much better for operations scale. The other option is aviaries. These are people who are usually just keeping quail for pets. If you're keeping quail for meat, you're probably not keeping them in an aviary style unless you're only eating quail once or twice a month. So the cool thing about these is they're pretty set it and forget it. They can easily be automated. You put your waterers down, you put your feeder down, you fill them up once a week. It doesn't take a whole lot of input. And the fun thing about this is it's an Easter egg hunt every time you want to go get eggs. You got to find them. Quail do not lay in nesting boxes. They lay wherever they are standing at that time that the egg comes out. So, if you have a nesting box, they may lay in it sometimes, but they won't do so consistently. This is great for small scale operations, or if you want to treat your quail more like pets than livestock. Either one is fine. The problem that I see a lot of times with aviary styles, there's a lot of predator pressure because people don't build them right. So, like I said, put a potato chip of the world. Everything likes to eat them. A raccoon, a possum will tear into your wire if you have them if it's not secured enough, right? Bears will break into them. There's a lot of reasons that this doesn't work and can be dangerous for your birds, but if you build it right, I said I wasn't going to do that. If you build it right the first time, it's not a big deal. The other thing too with aviary styles that's difficult is it really works well for if you just have a few. It doesn't really work if you have a lot of them. If you have a lot of roosters in this small space, they're going to fight. They're territorial. That's just how they are. So you have to think about your environment. Are they indoor birds? Are they outdoor birds? Quail don't care about the cold. They're very cold hardy birds. Ours come off heat at 3 weeks, and I put them out in the snow and they're fine. I don't lose any birds. They do not mind the cold. Once it gets over about 90, 95 degrees, they start to struggle a little bit. And we don't have a whole lot of days like that here. But if you have them outside, you just want to think about like having them in a shady place, having them with lots of water, having a little bit of protection from the sun. Anytime that there's a lot of noise that can scare them, it's something that they're not used to, they'll stop laying. So for example, we have some birds inside of a building, but we also have some of our quail outside. My outside birds are very used to a lot of noise. The only time they've ever stopped laying, because we live beside a busy road, is when the power company came into the back side of the property and cut like 15 trees down in one day. And that was very loud, and they stopped laying for about 2 weeks. You want to think about how you're going to keep everything sanitary, keep everything disinfected. Periodically, you want to clean your cages out. And by clean your cages out, I mean like a full clean. That's the best way to prevent disease, is to have clean cages. You got to think about biosecurity. We talked about avian flu a little bit. My outside birds, when avian flu hit our town and was found in a wild vulture population in our town, all my birds went inside. And they stayed inside until like the threat of that was gone. So there's not a whole lot of interaction between the wild birds and our birds, but we have some peacocks that roam onto our property that somebody else owns, and so I just wanted to keep them safe just in case. Lastly, waste management. It's a big concern with quail. You can use their waste on your garden or for your house plants, whatever you want, but they make a lot of it. They're little birds, but they make a lot of poop, so you need to have a plan for it. The cool thing though is their poop, if you are into like vermicomposting or anything like that, like black soldier flies, love it. We just let black soldier fly larvae establish under our quail cages that are outside. every year, and then they take care of the poop. I get worm castings, and then those larvae go straight back into my quail cages. My quail love to eat them. So it's kind of a nice little loop there. So how do you feed your quail? The best answer I'm going to tell you is to give them a pellet or a crumble that comes from a commercial supplier. I know a lot of people are like, well, I want to grow them off of whatever, right? I don't want to have any commercial inputs. You can, but they require a lot of protein. So they'll need between 28-30% protein when they're babies. And that's very hard to get from like a traditional grain feed. In the wild, they eat a lot of seeds. They eat a lot of insects. That's how they get that protein. And unless you're planning on having like an insect farm, you're probably not going to be able to do that, right? Now, if you want to get into raising, mealworms or whatever, you totally could, but it just takes a lot more effort to do it that way. The problem with quail feed from a commercial thing is they're not usually quail specific. So I know around us, they just stopped carrying my sport bird quail feeder, so we've had to switch suppliers. And I've had that happen 3 or 4 times where I find a feed, I like it, I supplement it, and then they stop carrying it because they're just not doing enough volume. So for the babies, we usually do a turkey starter. Generally, I can find that. And for the adults, it's just that they need a higher protein than like a chicken does. And that's what most places carry is chicken. So you need very high protein for all of the levels. Babies, 28 to 30%. Juveniles, really up 24 to 28 is good. And adults need over 20. So 20 and up is good. So for our adults, we can usually find like an all flock feed that has the protein that we need, or like a feather fixer or something like that. What they lack though in those feeds is the calcium. So mostly 3.5% calcium in order to continue to lay eggs. So the way you get around that is buy the feed with the higher protein and supplement oyster shells. Grind up some oyster shells, they'll eat it as they need it. You can also feed their shells back to them, and they can get calcium from those. So when I pickle up eggs, I usually do a couple hundred pickled eggs at a time because my husband eats them like they're candy. And we take those eggs, the shells, let them dry out, and they go back to the birds. And the birds will get calcium from eating their own eggshells. So there's a couple ways around that. If you're going to forage food for them or grow food, we use that as a supplement, right? So our birds get snacks from the garden, they get snacks from our kitchen, and they get snacks from our black soldier fly. But some people choose to do this entirely. They don't use any kind of commercial feed at all. They only use it, so that usually involves like a forage system where they're growing like alfalfa or oat sprouts for them to kind of eat. Lots of insects, like I said, you gotta have a worm farm pretty much if you're gonna do that. So there's some benefits in that you get to control their diet exactly. The negatives though is it's a lot more work, right? It's a lot more work. And it can be difficult to nail down like exactly what their percentages you're giving them unless you have like a pretty good math background. And quail are picky, so they're gonna eat what they wanna eat first, and it's not necessarily what they need. So they're gonna eat, for example, if I give my quail part of a watermelon and a bowl of black soldier fly larvae, they're gonna eat the watermelon first because it has a lot of sugar in it. But what they need is the protein from the soldier fly larvae. They love our watermelon lines. They get all of them in the summer. But they're not always gonna eat what they should. It's like children, right? So how do you breed them? How do you hatch them? Do they multiply quickly? That's a mistype. I should say like quickly. The interesting thing about quail is they've been in captivity so long that they don't go broody very often, and even when they do, they're really bad mothers. So if you're going to raise quail and hatch them, you have to have an incubator. I say this because even if your quail goes broody, which doesn't happen very often, I've never seen a quail sit on a clutch of eggs for more than 6 days. So your eggs will start to develop, and then it's kind of like she forgets about what she's doing. I don't know why, but they just do. I don't know if it's been bred out of them or not. So I always just, if we're going to raise them, we put them in an incubator because I don't want to lose them. You need at least a week with the roux, where the roux is fertile and mounting the birds to get fertile eggs. And another thing to keep in mind, your birds are going to molt twice a year. When they're molting, it's going to take them 2 to 4 weeks to get their feathers back. And during that time, they like lose all their feathers. It looks pretty ugly. You can see their skin. They're not going to lay during that time. The best way to help them through a molt is to give them more protein. It helps them replace those feathers faster. You can make it closer to 2 weeks instead of 4, but you're not going to get eggs during that time. So if all of your birds are the exact same age, we're going to go through a molt at the exact same time. So what we like to do is stagger our hutches. So I keep some back every month. So I always have a group of birds that are going through a molt, but I don't have all of my birds going through a molt, if that makes sense. As far as for the roos as well, it can take a little bit of time for them to figure things out. They are sexually mature at 6 weeks, but they may not consistently have the ability to fertilize eggs until 8 weeks. If they're too fat, they're going to be too lazy. If they're too fat, they can also hurt your hens. So you don't want to overfeed them. And then, just like most animals, there's some seasonal variability. They're fertile all the time, except for when there's not at least 12 hours of daylight. So if there's not at least 12 hours of daylight, their bodies will actually stop producing the bird equivalent of sperm. That's really easy to check. If you want to come to my booth later, I will show you how to sex a male and a female and what that ruse look like when they have, it's a foam that comes out of their cloaca. So to hatch them, it takes 16 to 18 days. We lock down our birds on day 15. If you've hatched birds before, you know that means they turn. On days 0 to 15, on day 15, we pull them out of the egg turners. We remove the egg turner, and we hike up the humidity. So you want about 45% on days 0 through 15, and then starting at day 15, we bring our humidity up between 60 and 75%. That softens the shell and allows the birds to come out easier. You incubate at 100.5 degrees, but you turn it down to 99.5 to get them to help them to come out. Like I said earlier, they can stay in the incubator for up to 48 hours. Once you remove them from the incubator, they need heat. They're going to need heat for 2.5 to 3 weeks. That's how long it takes them to get fully feathered. It depends on how you're changing the weather, right? So day 1, when they come out of the incubator, it needs to be 90 degrees minimum, sometimes 95, but usually 90. They're going to let you know if they're cold. They'll all huddle up. If they're hot, they will be as far away from the light as they can be. So they'll let you know. We drop the temperature by about 5 degrees every other day. So I have 2-week-old quail back here at our booth, and they're okay in this weather off heat. But like I wouldn't have left them here overnight without all these heaters running in the barn, right? So they're okay down to about 45 degrees right now, but they're just not ready for fully off heat yet. So how do you go from hatch to harvest? You're going to feed your quail whatever they want to eat, however much they will eat. It's going to be about a teaspoon a day to start when they're babies, and that goes up to about 2 tablespoons as adults. Quail, though, you want to make sure they have access to food at all times. If they don't, they will start to peck on each other. They will injure each other once one bird starts bleeding while the other birds gang up on it. And they are cannibalistic, just like chickens in that way. So unless you want to come back to not a live baby bird, you need to make sure they have protein or have access to food at all times. So from birth to 6 weeks, you're looking at 26 to 30% protein. Kind of vary. You can use crumble or blended pellets. When I say blended pellets, what I mean is if your store only carries a pelleted feed and doesn't carry a crumble, put it through a blender and make it smaller. Their beaks are too little to eat the full pellets for their babies. Between 6 weeks and harvest for males, we just keep them on that high protein food. They're going to put on the weight that way. It keeps them happy. But if you're going to have breeders, your females, and any roos that are with them, because it doesn't bother them, we switch them to a layer type food that has added calcium. So that's that 20% plus per day, or 20% plus protein, give or take. So you can achieve that in a couple of ways. You can keep them on the same food and supplement calcium to make sure they're getting 3.5% calcium, or you can find a feed that is complete. We've done both depending on what our feed stores are carrying around us. Preparing for harvest, when you process your quail, matters about how much meat you're going to get off of them. So they have a pretty good feed to weight conversion ratio, but for example, your 6-week-old quails, when you process them, you're only going to get 3 to 4 ounces of meat off of them. They say they're ready at 6 weeks. That is true for standard quail. Standard quail get between 5 and 7 ounces, and that's as big as they'll get. Jumbo quails will get over 10 ounces, sometimes up to 14, depending on what lines you have and if you're selecting for size or not. So I usually find by 8 weeks they've hit that 10-ounce point. So you're going to get between 4 and 5 ounces of meat off of them. By 10 weeks though, they've really gotten over that 10 ounces. And if you think about 50% is what your meat rate is, you'll get a lot more if you just let them go that extra 2 weeks. And at 2 tablespoons of food a day, you're talking about, a few more cents. It's not a whole lot. So for us, it's worth it to let them go to 8 or 10 weeks, and we kind of decide based on the bird. So if we have some that have already hit a size that we want at 8 weeks, we'll process them, and the rest we'll put back in the pen and let them go another 2 weeks, and we'll process again in 2 weeks. Or we'll just wait and let everybody go. We've got an infant at home, so I know all of you who have kids know that sometimes things don't always go according to plan. So sometimes, they're 12 weeks old because, baby's been sick and I haven't slept in 3 days. So you just make it work. But we do 1 person per bird, give or take, depending on when you process them. So how do you process them? We did this yesterday. Like I said, I'll probably do another class today. Quail are very easy to process. You don't need any special equipment. All you need to process your quail really are your hands. You can do everything with just your hands. However, I like to use a pair of scissors. The best way to do it is to decapitate them entirely. With chickens, you'll slit their necks and let them bleed out. With quail, you can hold their heads off in your hands with about as much pressure as a Chinese finger trap. It's very easy. It's not a whole lot. Or that's what my husband does. I like to just take a pair of scissors and just snip the whole head off. After you've done that, you let it drain out. You have to decide if you're going to skin it or deglove it. If you're going to defeather your chickens or your quail so you keep the skin on, you need a plucker. You can hand pluck, just dip them in hot water and hand pluck it out. We just completely deglove them. So we just rip down the chest, take the whole skin off and toss it, and my dog eats it. So it's very similar to other poultry. I always tell people, good tools are a must, but good tools are subjective as far as it is with quail. So you need a bucket to have your waste, unless you have a hungry dog who's going to sit there and eat it for you. You need some ice and some water, and you need some sort of cutting tool. I do recommend having at least a pair of scissors to cut the feet off. You can do it with just your hands, but if you cut it, you don't have as many bone shards. So they're pretty easy as far as processing goes. To take care of them after that, I know everyone talks about letting your meat rest. With chickens, they need to sit for at least 24 hours. Quails are sheep, so they're smaller. They don't need as long to sit and let the rigor mortis come out of their muscles. So usually what we do is we process our quail in the morning, we take a break, we clean up, we go inside and have lunch. Everybody's sitting on ice water and some coolers while we're doing that. And I'll lay out stuff for dinner, start my bread, start my meat grinding, whatever I'm going to do, right? And then we go outside and then we package all of our quail up. So you can freeze them. If you do that, we use vacuum sealing and shrink wrapping both. It kind of depends on what we're doing. So we vacuum seal for market in large packs. We shrink wrap for ourselves in small individual packs. So I'll do 1 at a time in the shrink wrappers, kind of like you do with the chickens. You can also can quail. I didn't put it up here. Quail are pretty easy to put the whole bird in a jar and put it through a pressure canner, and then you have what is essentially like a canned chicken, but it's just quail meat instead. And like I said earlier, their bones, after they've been through a pressure canner, are soft enough that you could eat them if you wanted. We don't. We go ahead and pull them out. But you could. It's very much like salmon. When you eat canned salmon, you can eat the bones. You just don't have to. And a lot of people prefer not to. And then you get to plan for your recipes. So My favorite way to eat quail is wrapped in bacon done on the grill. That's my personal favorite. But quail are very versatile. They're very well known in a bunch of different cuisines around the world. So they're very popular in Asian dishes, but also Central American dishes. So one of our like quick, easy recipes is, if I haven't laid out anything for dinner, I'll go grab a pack of quail from the freezer, toss it in hot chili sauce, like a sweet Thai chili sauce, toss it in my air fryer, and it comes out in 7 minutes, and they're done. You microwave your minute rice and throw some broccoli through the microwave to steam too, and then boom, I have a meal that took me less than 10 minutes to prepare. And I don't know about you guys, but we both have full-time jobs. I actually have 2 jobs and we have a baby. So we have all that on top of our farm. So convenience meals are important for us, and that's one reason why I love these so much. My quails take significantly less time for me to take care of and even cook than our chickens do. We raise those too, but they're low time commitment, low effort, which we enjoy. So that's all I have. I tried to pare down this one from yesterday, so we're much quicker. So you guys have time to ask me questions. I just want to say thank you for letting me take your time up and teach you a little about one of my passions this morning. So. Questions? How I price them or how other people price them? So, in general, everyone's going to raise their quail differently. So everyone has different price points. Our birds are $2 the day they come out of the incubator, and they go up by $1 per week after that. Our adults are pretty standard flat, $10. That being said, there's a gentleman 35 minutes down the road from me, close to Richmond. His quail, he markets as organic. Can't really market them that way without the certification, but he markets them that way, right? His birds, the day they come out of the incubator, are $5, and they go up by $2 a week every week after that. So generally, you pick a starting point and you add whatever amount you want per week, and that's enough to like cover your feed and your time for that week. Usually, I find pretty commonly among most breeders that I talk to, the $1.50 to $2 range the day they come out of the incubator is what you can expect, and then add $1 per week after that. So you will always be able to find adult quail at like auctions. Sometimes you can get them for $5 a bird, but I always caution people about buying adult quail because they don't look any different. So a lot of quail breeders that are less than ethical will take their hens and their roosts that are no longer laying, they'll take them to an auction, and they'll take $5 a bird for those birds. The problem is, you'll never get an egg out of those birds, or if you do, it might be like one a month, and that's not what you bought them for, right? So there's a lot of reasons to buy juveniles, unless you know a good reputable breeder. So yeah, did you have a question, buddy? What's your question? If you wanted to take your quail on a walk, how would you do that? I put my quail in my pockets, like I did when I walked in here. I had a quail sitting in here. They also make little harnesses. You can attach a harness to them. The problem is quail don't really fly very well. So at least the ones that we raise, if they get out, this is for everybody else too, if they get out of your cage, they've got about 3, maybe 4 10-foot flights in them. And they like come up to here and they fly and then they crash. A lot of times when they crash, they roll. So if you wanted to take your little quail on a walk, he's probably not going to walk beside you, but he can fit in your pocket and you can carry him around, or you can put a little harness on him and at least be able to retrieve him when he flies. Or you could just chase him down. That's what I do. Sometimes they get away from me and I have to chase them. That's pretty fun. Any other questions? Yeah.
I know you said they don't fly very high.
No, so I don't free range my quail. My quail are in cages. I have no need to clip their wings because they're going to fly about as good as they would if they're clipped anyways. They're really bad flyers. But also, I keep mine in cages. So just so y'all know, don't make the same mistakes I did. I tried to free range quail in my garden because I read an article online that said you could. and I lost about 100 birds before I gave up. And it's just because everything needs them. I've tried to have them in tractors, and the raccoons and we live by the river, there's a lot of minks where we're at. They were the absolute worst. They'll get in, any size hole, and the minks kill for fun, and they slaughtered a lot of our birds. So that's why, if you're going to keep birds outside, I always recommend that you keep a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch wire on them. That is the wire, the only wire, so like a raccoon or a possum can't get their hand through. If you use like a 1 inch by 2 inch, one, the babies can get out, but also a raccoon or a possum can reach their hand in. It gives enough space for a dog to grasp the wire as well and rip the wire off. I had that happen with my rabbits, so I already knew not to do that for my birds. I got the rabbits first. But if there's a hungry animal coming through, they're gonna figure out how to get in there. So you need to keep your investment safe, or as safe as you can. Yep, we do 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. Yep. Yep. Any other questions? I'm going to be at my booth for the rest of the day till about 4:30, maybe 5. We'll be able to answer any other questions. You'll be able to see the birds. We have 2-week-old birds, 4-week-old birds, and adults with us.